The Awakening. The sun beat down mercilessly on the arid landscape of the Moroccan desert, its relentless heat shimmering off the sand in waves. Dr. Zara Malik wiped the sweat from her brow, her dark eyes squinting against the glare as she surveyed the excavation site before her. At 32, she was young for a lead archaeologist, but her reputation for meticulous work and groundbreaking discoveries had earned her this position. Dr. Malik. A voice called out, pulling her attention away from the intricate gridwork laid out across the dig site. We found something. Zara's heart quickened as she made her way across the uneven terrain, her boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. She'd been working on this site for weeks, following a hunch that had led her here, to the outskirts of an ancient trade route. The voice belonged to Ahmed, one of her most trusted assistants. As she approached, she could see the excitement in Ahmed's eyes. He stood at the edge of a freshly excavated pit, gesturing for her to join him. Zara carefully made her way down, her trained eyes immediately drawn to a glint of metal poking through the sand. "Careful now," she murmured, more to herself than to Ahmed. With practiced precision, she began to brush away the centuries of accumulated sand and grit. As more of the object was revealed, Zara's breath caught in her throat. It was a disc, about the size of her palm, made of a metal she couldn't immediately identify. Its surface was covered in intricate markings, unlike any script she had ever encountered. The disc seemed to pulse with an inner light, but Zara told herself it must be a trick of the harsh desert sun. "Ahmed, get me the camera and the sample kit," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. As her assistant scrambled away, Zara couldn't tear her eyes from the artifact. Something about it felt wrong. Not in the sense of it being fake or out of place, but as if its very existence here was an impossibility. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. The disc was carefully removed, photographed, and preliminary tests were run. But as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the camp, Zara found herself no closer to understanding what they had unearthed. That night, as she sat in her tent poring over the day's findings, a gust of wind swept through the camp, extinguishing her lamp. In the sudden darkness, Zara could have sworn she saw the disc glow. The strange markings seemed to shift and move in the moonlight. She blinked, and the moment passed. Shaking her head, she relit the lamp, attributing the vision to exhaustion. The next morning, Zara woke to find the camp in disarray. Equipment had been scattered, tents were torn, and a deep unease had settled over her team. It was the wind, some murmured, but Zara had spent enough time in the desert to know this wasn't the work of any sandstorm. As she helped to set the camp back in order, her mind kept returning to the disc. She couldn't shake the feeling that its discovery had set something in motion, something beyond her understanding. Over the next few days, strange occurrences became commonplace. Team members reported hearing whispers in the night, in a language none of them recognized. Tools would go missing, only to reappear in impossible locations. And always, Zara felt as if she were being watched. A week after the disc's discovery, Zara made a decision. She needed more information, resources that weren't available to her here in the field. Carefully packing the artifact, she prepared to return to her university in London, leaving Ahmed in charge of the ongoing excavation. As she zipped up her bag, a chill ran down her spine. She turned to find a figure standing in the entrance of her tent, backlit by the setting sun. For a moment, Zara's heart raced, fear gripping her. But as her eyes adjusted, she realized it was an old man, his weathered face etched with lines that spoke of a lifetime under the desert sun. "Who are you?" Zara demanded, her hand instinctively moving to protect the bag containing the disc. "How did you get past the guards?" The old man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was like dry leaves rustling in the wind. "You have awakened something, Dr. Malik. Something that was meant to stay buried." Zara's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about? How do you know my name?" The man took a step forward, and Zara found herself rooted to the spot. "The disc you found is not just an artifact. It is a key and a warning. There are forces at work here beyond your comprehension, forces that have shaped the course of human history from the shadows. Zara's scientific mind rebelled against the man's words, but she couldn't deny the chill that ran through her. What forces? What are you talking about? The old man's eyes seemed to look through her, focusing on something far beyond the confines of the tent. There was a civilization, long ago, that reached heights your modern world can scarcely imagine. But their hubris led to their downfall, and they left behind guardians to ensure their mistakes would not be repeated. He refocused on Zara, his gaze intense. You stand at a crossroads, Dr. Malik. The path you choose will determine not just your fate, but the fate of all humanity. Before Zara could respond, a gust of wind whipped through the tent, kicking up a cloud of sand. She threw her arm up to shield her eyes, and when she lowered it, the old man was gone. Zara stood there, her heart pounding, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Part of her wanted to dismiss it as the ramblings of a madman or a hallucination brought on by the stress of the dig. But deep down she knew that everything had changed. With shaking hands, she zipped up her bag and stepped out of the tent. The sun had set, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. As she looked up at them, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that they were looking back, watching, waiting. She made her way to the transport vehicle, her mind racing. The old man's words echoed in her thoughts, mixing with the strange occurrences of the past week. As the driver started the engine, Zara looked back at the dig site, illuminated now by floodlights. She had come here looking for remnants of the past, for pieces of human history to study and catalogue. Instead, she found herself standing on the precipice of something much bigger, something that threatened to rewrite everything she thought she knew about the world and humanity's place in it. As the vehicle pulled away, kicking up a cloud of dust, Zara made a decision. She would not run from this. Whatever secrets the disc held, whatever dangers lay ahead, she would face them. She was an archaeologist, after all. Uncovering the secrets of the past was what she did. But as the dig site faded into the distance, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that this time, the past might not stay buried, and that the consequences of her discovery could reshape the future in ways she couldn't begin to imagine. The journey to the airport was tense, every shadow on the road seeming to hide potential threats. Zara clutched her bag close, acutely aware of the weight of the disc inside. What had the old man meant when he called it a key? A key to what? As they neared the city, Zara's phone buzzed. It was an email from her colleague, Dr. Elena Rossi, a linguist she had consulted on previous digs. The subject line made her breath catch. Urgent, strange markings. With trembling fingers, Zara opened the email. Elena's message was brief, but it sent a chill down Zara's spine. Zara, the photos you sent, I've never seen anything like it. The script doesn't match any known language, ancient or modern. But here's the thing, it's changing. I swear, every time I look at it, the markings are different. What have you found? Zara stared at her phone, her mind reeling. The markings were changing. How was that possible? She thought back to that night in her tent, when she thought she'd seen the disc glow, the markings shifting in the moonlight. She had dismissed it then, but now... As they pulled up to the airport, Zara made a split-second decision. She couldn't go back to London, not yet. There were too many questions, too many unknowns. She needed answers, and she had a feeling those answers weren't going to be found in the sterile laboratories of her university. She paid the driver and watched him drive away before turning and walking, not towards the airport entrance, but towards the car rental agencies. She had no plan, no destination in mind, but she knew she needed to keep moving. As she waited in line to rent a car, Zara's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from an unknown number. The answers you seek lie where the desert meets the sea. Follow the path of the ancients. Trust no one. Zara's heart raced. She looked around wildly, searching for the source of the message, but saw only the usual bustle of the airport. Who had sent it? The old man from the camp, someone else. With shaking hands, she rented a car, giving a false destination when asked about her travel plans. As she pulled out of the airport, the weight of the disc seemed to grow heavier in her bag. Zara realized she was no longer just an archaeologist on a dig. She had become part of something much larger, a mystery that spanned millennia. The road stretched out before her, leading into the unknown. As the first light of dawn began to paint the sky, Zara set out on a journey that would challenge everything she thought she knew about history, about reality itself. She didn't know where this path would lead, what dangers she might face. But she knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The journey. The coastal city of Essaouira rose from the desert like a mirage, its whitewashed buildings stark against the golden sand and deep blue of the Atlantic. Zara Malik stood on a hill overlooking the ancient port, the salt-laden breeze whipping her hair around her face. She had been driving for days, following cryptic clues and her own instincts, all the while feeling as if she were being pulled by an unseen force. The disc, still safely tucked away in her bag, seemed to pulse with an energy that grew stronger as she neared the coast. Where the desert meets the sea, the mysterious text had said. Well, here she was. But what now? As if in answer to her unspoken question, her phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. Seek the silent sage in the Blue City. Zara frowned. The Blue City. She knew of only one place that could be referring to, HFY, the mountain town famous for its blue-painted streets. But that was hundreds of miles away, in the opposite direction. What game was this mysterious guy playing? Before she could ponder further, a voice called out behind her. Dr. Malik, I've been expecting you. Zara whirled around, her hand instinctively going to her bag. A woman stood there, her dark skin weathered by sun and wind, her eyes sharp and knowing. She wore the traditional dress of the Berber people, but there was something in her bearing that spoke of a wisdom far beyond her apparent years. Who are you? Zara demanded, her voice hoarse from days of little use. How do you know me? The woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I am Ada, and as for how I know you, let's just say that the winds carry more than sand in this part of the world. You seek answers about the disc you carry. I can help you find them. Zara's scientific mind warred with a part of her that had been irrevocably changed by the events of the past weeks. In the end, curiosity won out. What do you know about the disc? Ada's eyes flickered to Zara's bag. Not here. The walls have ears, even in the open desert. Come, we must gather your team. My team? Zara asked, confused. I don't have a team. Ada's smile this time was genuine, if enigmatic. Not yet, but you will. Over the next few days, Zara found herself swept up in a whirlwind of activity. Under Ada's guidance, she reached out to colleagues and contacts across the globe. Dr. Elena Rossi, the linguist who had first noticed the changing nature of the disc's markings, arrived from Rome. She was followed by Dr. James Chen, a quantum physicist whose theories on interdimensional energy had earned him both acclaim and ridicule in academic circles. The final member of their unlikely quartet was Femi Okafor, a Nigerian historian specializing in oral traditions and folklore. His expertise, Ada insisted, would be crucial in understanding the legends that surrounded the disc and the civilization that created it. As they gathered in a small, nondescript house on the outskirts of Essaouira, Zara couldn't help but feel a sense of unreality. Just weeks ago, she had been a respected but relatively unknown archaeologist. Now, she was at the center of what felt like a conspiracy spanning millennia. The disc you found, Ada began, once they were all settled, is one of 7 created by an ancient civilization. A civilization so advanced that their technology would appear as magic to us even today. James leaned forward, his eyes sparkling with excitement. Are we talking about Atlantis? Ancient aliens? Ada shook her head. Nothing so fanciful. This civilization was human, as we are. But they discovered secrets about the nature of reality itself, secrets that allowed them to manipulate energy and matter in ways we can scarcely comprehend. But what happened to them? Elena asked, her fingers unconsciously tracing the photos of the discs spread out on the table before them. If they were so advanced, why did they disappear? Ada's face grew grave. They flew too close to the sun, as the saying goes. In their quest for knowledge and power, they unleashed forces they couldn't control. The 7 discs were created as a failsafe, a way to seal away the danger they had unleashed. But using them came at a terrible cost. Femi, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. There are stories, passed down through generations in my homeland, of a great calamity that nearly destroyed the world. A time when the sky burned and the earth shook, and entire continents were swallowed by the sea. Could this be related? Ada nodded. The stories you speak of are echoes of the truth, distorted by time, but preserving the essence of what happened. The activation of the discs saved humanity from extinction, but it also wiped out nearly all trace of the civilization that created them. Zara's mind was reeling. But why now? Why is the disc active after all this time? Ada's gaze seemed to pierce right through her. Because the danger is returning, the seals are weakening, and if all 7 discs are not brought together in time, the catastrophe of the past will pale in comparison to what's coming. A heavy silence fell over the room as the weight of Ada's words sank in. Zara looked around at the faces of her newfound team, Elena, pale and wide-eyed, James, his excitement now tempered with concern, Femi, his expression thoughtful and resolute. So what do we do? Zara asked, breaking the silence. How do we find the other discs? Ada stood, moving to a large map pinned to the wall. The discs were scattered across the globe, hidden in places of power. Your disc, she said, pointing to a spot in the Moroccan desert, was the first to awaken. The others will follow, drawn to each other like magnets. We must find them before others do. Others? James asked, a note of apprehension in his voice. Ada's expression darkened. You are not the only ones who have felt the stirring of ancient powers. There are those who would seek to use the discs for their own ends, heedless of the danger to the world. As if on cue, a loud crash came from outside. The room's occupants jumped to their feet as the sound of breaking glass and heavy footsteps filled the air. They found us, Ada said, her voice calm despite the chaos erupting around them. Quickly, we must leave. The journey begins now. What followed was a blur of action. Zara found herself running through the narrow streets of Essaouira, the disc clutched tightly to her chest. Behind her, she could hear the shouts of their pursuers, though she dared not look back. They reached the harbor just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the water. A small boat was waiting for them, its engine already running. As they clambered aboard, Zara caught a glimpse of their attackers, men in dark suits, their faces hidden behind black masks. As the boat sped away from the shore, Zara's mind raced. Who were these people? How had they found them? And more importantly, where were they going now? Ada, seemingly reading her thoughts, placed a hand on Zara's shoulder. We're headed for the next disc. The one in your possession is guiding us, pulling us towards its siblings. Zara looked down at her bag, feeling the weight of the disc inside. She realized then that she had crossed a point of no return. Whatever normal life she had known before was gone. She was now on a journey that would take her to the far corners of the earth, racing against time and unknown enemies to prevent a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. As the coast of Morocco faded into the distance, Zara turned to her companions. Elena was using her satellite phone, presumably calling in favors and gathering information. James was examining some sort of device he had pulled from his pack, muttering about energy signatures. Femi sat quietly, his eyes closed in what appeared to be deep meditation. This was her team now, Zara realized. A linguist, a physicist, a historian, and herself, an archaeologist. An unlikely group, thrust together by fate and ancient forces beyond their understanding. But as she looked at each of them, she felt a surge of hope. If anyone could unravel this mystery and save the world, it was them. The boat cut through the waves, heading out into the vast Atlantic. Zara didn't know what challenges lay ahead, what dangers they would face. But she knew one thing for certain: their journey was just beginning, and the fate of the world rested on their shoulders. As night fell and stars began to appear in the sky, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Not just by their pursuers, but by something older, something vast and incomprehensible. The disc in her bag seemed to pulse in response to her thoughts, as if confirming her suspicions. Whatever was coming, whatever force had set these events in motion, Zara and her team were now at the center of it all. The journey ahead would test them in ways they couldn't imagine, push them to their limits and beyond. But as Zara looked out at the endless horizon, she felt a strange sense of excitement mingling with her fear. This was what she had always dreamed of, uncovering the great mysteries of the past. She just never imagined that in doing so, she would be shaping the future of humanity itself. The boat sped on through the night, carrying them towards the unknown. The next disc awaited, and with it, the next piece of a puzzle that spanned millennia. Zara took a deep breath of the salty air, steeling herself for whatever lay ahead. The journey had begun, and there was no turning back now. The revelation. The ancient city of Petra loomed before them, its rose-red cliffs glowing in the light of the setting sun. Zara Malik stood at the entrance to the Sick, the narrow gorge that led to the hidden city. Her team gathered around her. They had traveled across 3 continents, battled unknown enemies, and unraveled centuries-old mysteries to reach this point. And now, finally, they stood on the threshold of answers. "The final disc is here," Ada said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hidden in the heart of the lost city." Zara nodded, feeling the weight of the 6 discs they had already collected in her backpack. Each one had led them on a perilous journey, from the icy fjords of Norway to the dense jungles of the Amazon, from the bustling streets of Tokyo to the remote steppes of Mongolia. And with each disc they recovered, the picture had become clearer, the danger more imminent. "We're not alone," James muttered, his eyes darting around nervously. The quantum physicist had proven to be more than just a theoretical mind over their journey, often sensing danger before it appeared. Elena placed a calming hand on his shoulder. "We've come too far to turn back now," the linguist said, her voice steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. Femi, the historian, stood silently, his gaze fixed on the ancient city before them. He had been instrumental in deciphering the clues left by the ancient civilization, his knowledge of folklore and oral traditions proving invaluable. As they made their way through the Sick, the towering cliffs on either side seemed to close in around them. Zara couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap, but they had no choice. The fate of the world hung in the balance. The discs they carried had revealed a terrifying truth. The ancient civilization hadn't just been advanced, they had discovered the key to manipulating the very fabric of reality. But in their hubris, they had torn a hole in the universe, a rift between dimensions that threatened to consume everything. The 7 discs were created as a failsafe, a way to seal the rift and contain the energy that threatened to destroy the world. But the seal was weakening, and if they didn't act soon, the catastrophe of the past would repeat itself on a global scale. As they emerged from the Sick, the famous treasury of Petra stood before them, bathed in the last light of day. But Zara's eyes were drawn to something else, a faint glow emanating from a small opening at the base of the cliff face, almost hidden from view. "There," she said, pointing. Without hesitation, the team made their way towards the opening. As they drew closer, the discs in Zara's backpack began to vibrate, resonating with an unseen energy. They had barely reached the entrance when a voice rang out behind them. "Stop right there." Zara whirled around to find themselves surrounded by a group of men in dark suits, the same mysterious organization that had been dogging their steps since Morocco. At their head stood a man Zara recognized from news reports and scientific journals, Dr. Victor Sloan, a billionaire tech mogul known for his interest in fringe sciences. "I must thank you, Dr. Malik," Sloan said, a cold smile playing on his lips. "You've done all the hard work for us. Now, hand over the discs." Zara's mind raced. They were so close, But now everything was falling apart. She glanced at Ada, hoping for guidance, but the woman's face was impassive. It was Femi who broke the silence. "You don't know what you're dealing with, Sloane," he said, his voice carrying the weight of the ancient stories he had studied. "The power in these discs isn't meant for human hands." Sloane's smile widened. "On the contrary, my friend, it's precisely meant for human hands, our hands. Imagine the advances we could make with that kind of power at our disposal. We could reshape the world." "Or destroy it," Elena interjected. As Sloane and his men moved closer, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. A low hum filled the air, growing in intensity with each passing second. "The rift," James gasped. "It's opening." In that moment of confusion, Ada acted. With a speed that belied her age, she snatched the backpack from Zara and darted towards the glowing entrance. "Follow me," she cried. Zara and her team didn't hesitate. They plunged into the opening, the sounds of shouting and gunfire erupting behind them. The narrow passage quickly gave way to a vast underground chamber, illuminated by a pulsing blue light. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, upon which rested the seventh and final disc. But it was what loomed behind the pedestal that took Zara's breath away, a swirling vortex of energy, a tear in the very fabric of reality. "The rift," Ada said, her voice filled with awe and fear. "It's already begun to open." Sloane and his men burst into the chamber, their weapons trained on Zara and her team. But even they faltered at the sight before them. "My God," Sloane whispered, "it's beautiful." Zara could feel the pull of the rift, an otherworldly force that seemed to tug at her very being. Images flashed through her mind, glimpses of other worlds, other realities. She understood then the temptation that had led the ancient civilization to their doom. "The discs," Ada cried. "We must use them now, before it's too late." Zara snapped back to reality. She grabbed the backpack from Ada and rushed to the pedestal. With trembling hands, she began to place the discs in a circular pattern around the seventh. Sloane seemed to shake off his awe. "Stop them," he ordered. But before his men could act, a blast of energy erupted from the rift, knocking everyone off their feet. Zara clung to the pedestal, her eyes squeezed shut against the blinding light. When she opened them again, she found herself face to face with a figure that seemed to be made of pure energy. It spoke, not in words, but in concepts that bloomed directly in her mind. "You have come far, Seeker," it said, "but the true test lies ahead." What are you?" Zara managed to ask. "We are the Guardians," the being replied, "the last of those who came before. We have waited eons for this moment." The being's gaze, if it could be called that, swept across the chamber. "The rift must be sealed, but the price is high. A sacrifice must be made, a life freely given to power the seal for another age." Zara's heart sank. A sacrifice? She looked at her team, Elena, James, Femi. They had become more than colleagues over this journey. They were family. How could she choose? But then her eyes fell on Sloane, who was staring at the being with a mixture of fear and avarice. She understood then that the choice wasn't just about saving the world, it was about protecting it from those who would exploit its deepest secrets. "I'll do it," Zara said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I'll be the sacrifice." "Zara, no!" Elena cried out. But Zara had made her decision. She turned to her team, tears in her eyes. "Finish what we started," she said. "Seal the rift, and make sure the truth of what happened here is never forgotten." Before anyone could stop her, Zara stepped into the swirling vortex of the rift. She felt her body dissolving, becoming one with the energy that surrounded her. But rather than fear, she felt a sense of peace. As her consciousness expanded, Zara saw the truth of the universe laid bare before her. She saw the countless worlds that existed alongside their own, the delicate balance that kept reality from unraveling. And she understood that her sacrifice would ensure that balance for generations to come. With her last human thought, Zara sent a pulse of energy through the discs. They began to spin, faster and faster, creating a barrier of light that pushed back against the rift. In the chamber, Zara's team watched in awe as the rift began to close. Sloane and his men, realizing the power they sought was slipping away, turned to flee, but Ada stood in their way, her eyes glowing with an inner light. "You will remember nothing of this," she said, her voice echoing with power. A wave of energy washed over Sloane and his men, and they collapsed to the ground, unconscious. As the last of the rift sealed itself, the chamber began to shake. "We must leave," Ada said. "This place has served its purpose." Reluctantly, Elena, James, and Femi followed Ada out of the chamber. As they emerged into the Petra night, they saw the entrance to the hidden chamber collapse behind them, sealing away its secrets forever. The stars seemed brighter somehow, as if the very universe was acknowledging the sacrifice that had been made. Elena wiped tears from her eyes, looking at the place where Zara had vanished. "What do we do now?" James asked, his voice hollow. Ada looked at each of them in turn. "We keep a promise," she said. "We tell the world the truth, not about the rift or the discs, but about the fragility of our reality and the need to respect the forces we don't understand." Femi nodded. "We'll make sure her sacrifice wasn't in vain." As they made their way back through the sick, each lost in their own thoughts, a warm breeze swept through the ancient city. For a moment, just a moment, they could have sworn they heard Zara's laugh on the wind. The world had been saved, though few would ever know how close it had come to destruction. And somewhere, beyond the veil of reality, Zara Malik watched over them all, a guardian of the greatest secret in human history. The adventure was over, but its impact would ripple through time, shaping the future in ways none of them could imagine. And in the stars that twinkled overhead, a new constellation seemed to form, a circular pattern of 7 points, a lasting memorial to the woman who had given everything to save the world.